stop moving. Even when everything around you seems still, it feels like there's a steady flow of thoughts behind your eyes, a quiet storm you can't step away from. You try to calm down, to stay in the moment, but your mind won't slow down. It drifts through old memories, breaks apart every conversation, and creates endless versions of a future that never arrives. Even in complete silence, the noise inside is overwhelming. You think and then notice yourself, thinking about the thinking. Music, you see others laugh with ease, move through life effortlessly, love without overthinking, and you wonder what it's like to live without examining every single heartbeat. For you, nothing ever feels simple. Every smile brings a new question. Every farewell turns into an analysis. You feel deeply, think excessively, care intensely, and it's both your strength and your burden. You weren't always like this. There was a time when you felt things without needing to explain them. But somewhere along the path, your mind became a shield, a fortress shaped by logic and memory, meant to protect you from hurt. Psychology describes this as hypervigilance, the brain staying alert to threats long after the real danger is gone. Maybe you learned early that safety isn't promised, so you began reading the world for signs, trying to predict the next problem before it happened. But this level of awareness has a price. The more you think, the less you feel connected to life around you. Every feeling gets filtered. Every moment gets examined under a mental microscope. You become both the participant and the observer, unable to fully be in the moment because you're busy analyzing it. In neuroscience, they call this analysis paralysis, the mental freeze that occurs when the mind spins through endless possibilities. When you can't limit your focus to just one thing, you begin to notice patterns in how people act, in how you respond, and in the repeated cycles of affection and isolation. You start seeing truths others miss, the delicate threads holding relationships together, and the quiet fears hidden behind someone else's laughter. Yet the more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to feel like you fit in. You want to be understood, but that desire often sets you apart. You want closeness, but you analyze it until it slips through your hands. There's a thin line between awareness and fixation, between curiosity and self-pressure, and deep thinkers often move along this line by themselves. You live in a world that values fast answers, even though your mind searches for questions that have none. So you keep exploring through memories, through dreams, through long nights, not to create pain, but because you simply cannot ignore the need to understand. But no one begins life like this. Deep thinking usually grows from quiet moments. It starts softly, a small child in a dim room, sitting on the floor, drawing while voices rise behind a closed door. They cannot grasp the meaning of the words, but they sense the tension. They study the silence, the pauses, the shaking tones hidden in the conversation. Before they can label emotions, they can already feel them. And so, they learn early not to cry, not to shout, not to ask for too much, only to watch. You may remember that feeling, standing in a home where love was uncertain, where affection shifted like the weather. Maybe your parents weren't unkind. Maybe they were simply distant, overwhelmed, or wrapped in their own struggles, unable to see yours. So you saw everything. You became the quiet child, the observer, the one who adapted and understood, the one who sensed conflict before it began. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, the survival skill of a child who learns that paying attention means staying safe. The young brain, still shaping itself, stretches to predict moods, tone changes, the slightest sign of danger. This is where overthinking begins, not as intelligence, but as instinct. The mind turns into a radar, always scanning for the warning before the chaos. You tell yourself it's curiosity. You tell yourself it's strength. But at the core, it is fear dressed as insider, need to feel in control in a world that often wasn't. You learn to identify patterns in people, to read expressions, to calm others long before calming yourself. You become the peacekeeper, the quiet thinker, trying to bring order through understanding. Attachment theory describes this clearly. When stable love is missing, the child's mind tries to fill in the blanks. You examine your parents' silence, their moods, their sighs, because your nervous system is trying to survive the uncertainty. You begin living more in your thoughts than in your body. Emotions turn into problems to solve. Emotions turn into information, and eventually thinking becomes the only place you can retreat. But that kind of inner depth often brings a sense of isolation. While other children played without worry, you were already trying to understand why people hurt each other, why they leave, and why they hide the truth. You felt older than your years, too aware, too alert. You held feelings bigger than what you knew how to manage, so you stored them quietly behind calm eyes. The world assumed your silence meant comfort, but inside your mind kept asking questions. That child, the one who noticed everything, learned to cope through constant thought. Yet coping is not the same as living. Reflection became a shield. Awareness became protection. And even as time moved on, that same mind kept observing, predicting, and studying everything around you. That child grows into an adult, and the skill that once kept them safe slowly becomes the very thing that creates distance. Eventually, the child who once watched quietly becomes the adult who cannot stop analyzing anything. You carry your intellect like a second skin, steady, refined, and hard to penetrate. People admire the depth of your understanding. They seek you out for guidance, for clarity, for meaning. You're the one who can explain what others struggle to describe, the one who finds lessons inside heartbreak and turns confusion into language. But beneath that clarity lives a quiet exhaustion, the tiredness of always being the person who knows. You learned to survive by thinking. It became your protection long before you noticed it happening. Every insight sharpens your mind, yet slowly dulls your ability to feel. When someone hurts you, you don't react with anger. You interpret. You trace their choices back to old wounds, to fear, to insecurity. You tell yourself that because you understand, you shouldn't feel hurt. But deep down, you just don't allow yourself to admit it. It's strange how emotional intelligence can turn into a shield. How empathy, once a strength, can create distance. You read people so clearly that you begin predicting their rejection before it even arrives. You prepare for heartbreak before love has the chance to start. It isn't pessimism. It's self-protection disguised as wisdom. The mask of insight keeps you safe, yet places you slightly apart from the world you want to connect with. Psychologists call this cognitive avoidance, the mind's way of staying protected. By staying busy in your head, by constantly analyzing, you avoid vulnerability. You avoid the messy uncertainty of simply feeling. Research shows that chronic overthinking is linked to increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reasoning center, and reduced emotional processing in the limbic system. In simple terms, you think to survive, but in doing so you forget to truly live. You convince yourself that understanding will bring peace, yet peace stays out of reach because understanding is not the same as acceptance. You can break down the logic of love yet still feel unloved. You can study happiness yet never fully experience it. The maze of thought protects you from others' unpredictability, but it also confines you within yourself. Sometimes you meet someone who almost reaches you, someone who makes you feel noticed instead of analyzed. But even then you hold back. You search their words for hidden meaning, their silence for warning signs. You confuse vulnerability with danger because, at one time, it was. So you stay the observer, the thinker, the mind behind the glass, brilliant, expressive, and solitary. You can explain everything except why understanding everything never feels like enough. Yet even the sharpest minds need grounding. And science has long tried to understand why deep thinkers experience the world differently. Your mind isn't chaotic, it's simply active. Even in stillness, it hums with a quiet current. Researchers call this the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for reflection, imagination, and creating meaning. For many people, this system rests when they do. But for you, it rarely turns off. It loops, replays, revisits, not by preference, but by design. You don't just live through moments, you process experiences, examine them, and search for their meaning long after they pass. Research shows that deep thinkers, those who are reflective, sensitive, and highly open, often have stronger connections between the parts of the brain responsible for memory, imagination, and emotional interpretation. This means your mind doesn't operate in a straight line. It works like a network. Each thought links to another. Every feeling branches into many more, creating detailed patterns of reflection that most people never notice. You can call it intelligence, intuition, or creativity, but it is also mental overstimulation. Your mind doesn't simply think about the world, it absorbs it. Psychologists associate this with a trait known as openness to experience. One of the major Big Five personality factors. People who score high in this area tend to be curious, imaginative, and responsive to beauty and meaning. But this same openness carries a price: emotional sensitivity. Because your perception is wide open, everything enters: joy, discomfort, and even the noise you wish you could ignore. You don't just observe the world, you feel its pressure settling into your mind. Then comes empathy, a quality that can help or overwhelm. Studies show that people with stronger mirror neuron activity often take on the emotions of others as if they were their own. You walk into a room and sense tension before anyone speaks. You detect pain that hasn't been voiced. It isn't intentional. Your brain is designed to notice these signals. But this awareness means your emotional energy is always partly occupied. You live with a constant background hum that never fully quiets. Some research even suggests that deep thinkers shift between two major brain systems, the analytical network and the empathic network, to modes that always works smoothly together. When one is active, the other resists, so you move back and forth between logic and emotion, analysis and empathy, clarity and sensitivity. It's a tug-of-war inside your mind, an organized complexity only you experience. There is beauty in this depth. It fuels creativity, insight, and self-awareness, but it also brings risk. When the same mental circuits that create meaning also amplify pain, you can begin to sink into your own thoughts. You start to confuse thinking with control and rumination with understanding. A constantly active mind can reveal truths others overlook, yet it can also trap you inside them. The same depth that offers insight can also turn inward, creating a quiet darkness only deep thinkers recognize. There comes a point when your thoughts shift against you. It doesn't appear suddenly. It slips in slowly, somewhere between healthy reflection and excessive analysis. What once felt like clarity begins to feel like pressure. You keep thinking, examining, and sorting until your thoughts stop helping and start consuming. You lie awake at night, your body at rest, but your mind alert, replaying conversations, imagining futures that never happened, and exploring endless possibilities. It's a kind of restlessness that doesn't require nighttime. It can follow you through the brightest hours. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we avoid acknowledging, which grow stronger the more we try to ignore them. For deep thinkers, the shadow is thought itself. The same mental sharpness that once felt freeing begins to tighten, bit by bit. Every idea opens the way to another. Every answer becomes a new question. Eventually you begin to wonder whether your intellect is a strength or a trap. You find meaning everywhere, yet peace remains out of reach. There is a reason for this struggle. The human brain was never built to hold limitless awareness. Cognitive science suggests that too much activity in the default mode, the system responsible for self-reflection, can blur the boundary between creativity and overthinking. You don't just consider life, you examine it deeply. You question the purpose of love, the reality of suffering, and the nature of existence. It is both inspiring and exhausting. You may feel separate from others because your mind operates several layers below the surface. Small talk feels superficial, laughter feels temporary, and connection feels conditional. You sometimes envy those who live without needing constant explanation. For them, the world simply exists. For you, the world must always hold meaning. And in your search for meaning, you can drift away from living itself. The philosopher Nietzsche once warned that if you look too long into the abyss will look back. You begin to sense a quiet unease, the feeling of being confined within your own depth. Thought becomes both your refuge and your restraint. You start to see your reflection everywhere, in people's reactions, in passing comments, in long nights without sleep. The mirror keeps showing you something, yet never offers calm. It isn't instability. It's sensitivity turned inward, intellect stretched to its limit. You can't stop thinking, not because you enjoy it, but because silence threatens to reveal what you've been avoiding. You fear that, without constant thought, you may finally have to feel. Still, this struggle doesn't arise alone. It's shaped by the world around you. You may have felt as if you were born in the wrong era, as though your mind speaks a slower, softer language that today's world doesn't recognize. People move fast, talk loudly, scroll endlessly, their attention flickering like screens, their focus chasing the next distraction. Everything feels urgent and immediate, yet little feels genuine. In a noise-driven world, silence becomes an act of resistance. You likely know that tension between your depth and the speed of society. You pause to think, yet hesitation is discouraged. You search for meaning, but meaning takes time, something few people seem to have anymore. The digital age has conditioned attention like a restless muscle, reacting to each notification. Even your thoughts must compete with algorithms whispering what you should desire, who you should become, and how quickly you should move. The result is a quiet suffocation, not physical, but mental. Psychologists describe it as cognitive overload, the burnout of a mind constantly stimulated, yet rarely nourished. Research shows that attention spans have declined sharply over the past 20 years, not because people are less capable, but because they are more divided. Our mental energy is split into fragments, each one chasing novelty instead of understanding. For a deep thinker, this fragmentation can feel like emotional exile. You recognize the world's complexity, its beauty and its pain. While the culture around you demands shortcuts and certainty, You begin to hide your depth because it unsettles others. You soften your viewpoints, simplify your ideas, and respond politely to humor that doesn't truly amuse you, or to appear ordinary in a society that often mistakes disinterest for maturity. But underneath that presentation, something inside you aches. You long for genuine connection, meaningful conversation, real stillness. Yet when you try to speak in the language of reflection, it often goes unheard. Even so, you resist becoming empty, because deep thinking in a distracted culture is not only uncommon, it's quietly radical. To slow down is an act of refusal. To feel deeply is to push back against numbness. To question widely is to reclaim your mind from mass conformity. You become a quiet rebel, not through noise, but through awareness. But even rebels become tired, because the cost of seeing clearly is feeling intensely. As the world moves faster, your mind dense with meaning struggles to keep pace. There is a unique exhaustion that comes from sensing everything. You don't collapse from effort, but from caring too much, from recognizing patterns others miss, and carrying emotional weight no one else notices. Your fatigue comes not from doing, but from perceiving. Your mind grows heavy not with chaos, but with understanding. You move through life with eyes that observe constantly, the couple disagreeing softly at the cafe, the cashier's strained smile, the friend who says "I'm fine" in a voice that wavers. You notice all of it, you absorb it, and while others move forward, you carry these small truths home, where they linger like unfinished thoughts. This is the unseen cost of awareness. Every reality you notice settles within you. Psychologists call it empathy fatigue, an emotional drain that comes from persistent sensitivity. The same neural systems that make you compassionate also release stress hormones when overstimulated. Your brain, built for survival, interprets emotional signals as subtle alarms. The result is a hidden tension, a quiet inner shaking you can't easily name. You smile, you function, yet inside, you feel as if you're always preparing for something. This is what happens when awareness becomes too sharp. You start to feel responsible for pain around you, for fragile relationships, even for your inability to shut down emotions. Your empathy, once a strength, begins to burn. You want to care, but you're drained. You want to love, but love feels heavy. You want to rest, but your mind refuses to soften. You remain both observer and container, always absorbing, analyzing, feeling. Still, beneath the fatigue lies something meaningful. This type of exhaustion comes not from emptiness, but from depth, from seeing the world clearly in a culture that often prefers to look away. It means your heart is still awake enough to feel, that you haven't become hardened, even though indifference would be easier, yet the burden remains real. The inability to quiet your mind blurs the line between wisdom and sorrow. You begin to wonder whether awareness is worth its weight if knowing so much about life limits your ability to experience it freely. But even as these thoughts appear, something within you refuses to surrender your depth. You sense, however faintly, that this weight you carry, the ache of understanding, holds its own purpose. Within this weight lies the possibility of change. If you learn not to silence your depth but to live with it differently, you eventually realize you cannot think your way out of everything. You've tried breaking down every feeling, every pause, every moment that hurt you. But not every wound can be solved by understanding. Some things must be felt and not fixed. Healing for a deep thinker doesn't come from more analysis, it comes from remembering how to simply be. You begin to see that peace is not the absence of thought, but the ability to stop believing every thought. A mind that never stops cannot be silenced, but it can be eased. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reshape itself through new habits, new awareness, new compassion. The same pathways that once looped with fear and analysis can slowly learn to rest. Mindfulness isn't about clearing the mind. It's about holding thoughts lightly instead of being overwhelmed by them. You start noticing small details. Again, sunlight moving across a curtain, the steadiness of your breath, the warmth of a cup in your hands. You begin inhabiting your body, not just your mind. Psychologists call this embodiment, grounding your awareness in the present, where life actually takes place. Because no matter how intelligent your thoughts are, they cannot live life for you. Only your senses can. Gradually you create boundaries not around others, but within yourself. You stop letting every issue claim space in your mind. You stop dissecting every silence. You ask, does this thought help me, or does it drain me? Writing becomes a release, not a task, a way to let out what has remained unspoken. Creating, whether through words, art, or motion, becomes a bridge between what you feel and what you are ready to release. And perhaps the deepest form of healing is connection, expressing your truth without over-explaining it. sitting with someone while staying present rather than lost in thought, sharing silence without needing to fill it. When you live from your depth, life becomes something to experience, not something to decode. You realize the problem was never your deep thinking. The problem was the belief that depth must come with suffering. You are never too much, only to awake in a world uneasy with reflection. Maybe the greatest understanding is recognizing that thinking deeply was never the burden forgetting how to feel was. Eventually, after all the questioning and restless nights, your mind grows tired, not defeated or broken, just weary of its own noise. You begin to see that all your searching, all your ideas, have been a long walk in circles. You've explored every possibility, chased countless truths, yet the peace you wanted was never in the answers. It lived in the stillness beneath each step. You realize your thoughts, brilliant as they are, have been both guide and barrier. They helped you through darkness, yet also kept you inside it. Every insight led to another question. Every explanation revealed another layer. UVA looked into the infinite long enough to understand that the mind's desire for certainty never ends. Freedom comes when you stop demanding answers and begin allowing awareness. Science shows the brain is always active, even at rest, electrical waves moving through the default mode network. But beneath that constant activity exists something quieter, something beyond measurement, consciousness itself, the space where thoughts rise and fade, the steady observer behind every question. Philosophers like Alan Watts noted that the purpose of thinking is eventually realizing its limits. Jung described individuation as the moment you integrate both light and shadow, discovering there was nothing to resist. It's the paradox of awakening. The more you understand, the less you need to explain. You begin trading complexity for clarity, noise for nuance, searching for seeing. There is humility in this stage of surrender that feels like freedom, not loss. You no longer need to interpret every pause or label every emotion. You start to sit with life as it is, unfiltered, unforced. You feel the world instead of analyzing it endlessly. You breathe not to silence the mind, but to remember you exist beyond it. In that stillness, you uncover a truth that feels both old and newly discovered. That genuine intelligence lives not in endless thinking, but in presence. That wisdom lies not in accumulating more, but in requiring less. The mind is a capable servant, yet an unsteady master, and one day, when all the questions settle, you finally sense it, the quiet rhythm beneath thought, offering what you were searching for all along. You were never meant to think your way to peace, only to remember that you already hold it.